Welcome back to True East. We're now seeing a wave of military reviews and investigative reports explaining how Israel suffered such a devastating failure on October 7th. And while much of the conversation is focused on what went wrong that day, the tactical failures, the intelligence gaps, and lack of preparedness, I would like us to take a step back and ask a different question. Because what's becoming clear is that there wasn't a single failure. That might have made this easier to fix. Instead, the evidence points to something far deeper, a systemic breakdown, a failure that didn't begin on October 6th, but one that's been developing quietly for years, maybe even decades. Take the newly released report on the IDF base at Nahal Oz. Only one soldier was guarding the perimeter. Key defensive positions were unmanned. Hamas had detailed intelligence on the layout, the troop schedules, and the vulnerabilities. Within 30 minutes, around 250 terrorists overran the base, killing 53 soldiers and abducting 10 others. Or consider Netiv HaSorah, a small moshav near the border, despite 37 soldiers being present, including a battalion commander. 3 terrorists killed 17 civilians. Local defense teams were ordered not to engage. Golani soldiers were nearby, but they lacked functioning communication equipment. Over the years, the security presence had been quietly scaled back from 2 platoons to a skeleton force, reflecting a dangerous complacency that proved fatal on October 7th. And it wasn't just in the south. Months before the war, the state controller warned that Israel's northern border with Lebanon was also critically exposed. Many outposts lacked barriers. Soldiers were sent out repeatedly on false alarms, draining readiness. Equipment was outdated. Despite the looming Hezbollah threat, there were only a few hundred soldiers stretched across the entire northern front. The conclusion was stark. Had Hezbollah attacked that morning, Israel was no more prepared in the north than it was in the south. These are not isolated failures. They reveal something deeper, something that cuts across geography, leadership, doctrine, and yes, even across politics. Which brings us to the central question of today's episode. What happened to Israel's military strategy? Why did it work in 1948 and in 1967? And where was it on October 7th? Does Israel still have an art of war? Who created it? Where did it go? And are we rebuilding it? To help us explore these questions, I'm joined by Amiad Cohen. Amiad is the CEO of the Herut Center, a conservative educational organization that cultivates Israeli intellectual leadership and discourse. He's also the publisher of Hashiloach, a leading Hebrew language journal of ideas. Amiad is widely recognized for his thought leadership on Israel's national security, strategic doctrine, and public policy. And Amiad is not speaking from the sidelines. As a major in the IDF reserves, Amiad has spent more than 270 days on the northern border in Lebanon since October 7th, witnessing firsthand how Israel is adapting to the new era of warfare. Amiad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Amiad, I want to bring you back to October 7th, but a little bit different than what we usually hear. There's a lot of reports about what happened on October 7th, including myself. People drove south to the border with Gaza. You have a unique story. You didn't drive south.
Yeah, so at the morning of October 7th, I woke up, as all my community, to daven Shachrit. We live north of Jerusalem, so we didn't get the rockets. We didn't wake up from sirens. And then we started to get some insights of what's happening in the south. And the first thought that came to my mind is what's happening in the north. If there is an invasion and attack in the south, there's high probability that it's going to happen the same thing up in the north. 9:30 a.m. I already gave the first phone call to my commanding officer in the IDF in our brigade that is based on the northern border to see what's happening. They had no idea. We got more and more information about what's happening in the south. And 10:30 already a.m., I took the car and drove up to the north without being called, assuming that that's going to happen. At approximately 11:30 noon, the entire brigade was already called up to the north. 6 p.m., I was already posted in the Hermon mountain up in the northern border of Israel. And opening the command and control center for our brigade, and preparing to take responsibility with our brigade to release the ordinary army, their brigade, to go south to fight in Gaza, and we were supposed to protect the northern border. I was driving on Route 6 from Eli to the north, and with a lot of cars like mine, driving north with one soldier, mostly officers, with uniforms, driving to the north and always looking at the cell phone to understand what's happening in the south.
Parents leaving their children behind,
Of
their
course,
families
of course.
on Simchas Torah.
Yes. I hugged my son. I have one son and 5 girls. And I told him, this is an historical day for the state of Israel. Remember this day because the state of Israel will not look the same thing as it used to be till today. And I went up to the north, and my father-in-law gave me Chanukiah. He said, you will need that. And I thought it was a joke. But yes, we were there till almost Purim. That's almost 5 months forward. Yes, it was a crazy time, and it still is.
So, Amiad, you've seen the northern border repeatedly over the last 2 decades. What did you see on that day of October 7th?
So we trained for defending the northern border. Our brigade was actually pretty ready to be a fast brigade that was supposed to jump in less than 24 hours to be already prepared on the border. So we found exactly things as we prepared them in the past several years. So on that aspect, the IDF was ready, but it was ready for the defense part of it, assuming we will had a notice in advance that Hezbollah is coming. But obviously no one knew. You opened saying that if Hezbollah was on the northern border, we had only approximately 400 soldiers on the northern border to defend it. In October 7th night, we had approximately 45,000 soldiers defending the border. That's a difference, just to give people a sense of what would have happened if Hezbollah would have invaded Israel that morning. They would have succeeded to go down into Haifa, that's 20, 30 kilometers south, with tens of thousands of casualties. And it would have taken Israel months if we have succeeded to regain territory, assuming they would connect to the Arab population in the north of Israel. That was a different war that we would have been fighting.
So we're talking, compared to the south, how would you compare in terms of devastation?
No comparison. It was a total disaster if it would have happened in the north. A year after October 7th, I spent time in Kile, in the eastern part. We cleaned up. Actually, you see Adaise, El Adese, it's called. From there to the east, I spent almost 2 months cleaning with our brigade most of the Shiite and Sunni towns on the border. The amount of ammunition and weapons that we found there was an unbelievable amount that the Hamas in Gaza was only a fraction of it.
Were the ammunition was found in the homes of the people? Were the people were they fighters? I mean, how do you distinguish between the people in the homes and?
There were no people at the homes. It was all they left. The population left. It was all empty. But every house that we found was with either one room full of munitions, a room with bags that was signed with names of soldiers that was prepared to go in. So it was not real towns. It was army bases that were camouflaged as Shia towns on the border, and that's how we looked at it. It's actually an army base, and the population of the town were all Shiites, and they're all soldiers. They think themselves as soldiers, part of the crusade or like the Muslim jihad against Israel, and that's what their goal was. And even in the Sunni towns, so Hezbollah is Shiite, Shaba and Shuba are Sunni population, and even there, everyone had a munition military warehouse in its house.
So the most recent intelligence reports say that actually Hamas and Hezbollah were coordinated. They had coordinated an attack. Something went wrong along the way. Maybe Hezbollah delayed, and maybe they didn't have the nerve to go in, or they were taken by surprise of the exact hour, the exact day. But from what you're saying, had they attacked that morning, so they would have gone from Adaise, Murn al-Ras, Yarun, all the way from Sidon, all the way down into Haifa, which for people who know is a major city in Israel, and basically dissected Israel into two.
They would take a big chunk of the northern part of it. It's not dissected into two. They would take all of that to the south. They had very, very detailed plans how to do it. They had the biggest special force that they had, called the Radwan forces, approximately 10,000 trained soldiers invading Israel. It's a big amount of it's a big brigade with many soldiers, very trained. And remember, it was all backed up with a very heavy artillery attack on Israel with the rockets and missiles that they had and the drones that they did. And now, again, going back to your question regarding why didn't they do it together? Hezbollah was not preparing to do it that day. But Hezbollah did not prepare. The reason I don't know enough intelligence to explain why they didn't, I was there October 7th and October 8th, Hezbollah was shocked. They did not prepare for that day. I understand that Hezbollah and Hamas with Iran planned to do something together. Hamas for its own reasons, and I think it's basically the ego balance between different thugs in our neighborhood, that they want to prove that they're stronger and more important than Hezbollah, and they assumed Hezbollah will join, which basically happened in some ways. But
Hezbollah began firing rockets on October 8th.
Yes. The first rocket of Hezbollah shot was basically very close to my head in the Herut Mountain, 6:30 a.m. on October 8th. I still remember waking up from it. But they were not ready. We saw them in our scopes, our drones, everything. We looked at the Hezbollah and they were not ready in any way to invade Israel on October 7th. One of the reasons I think that Hezbollah did not join Hamas is Hamas did not tell them, because you can see now the intelligence penetration that IDF is, the Israeli intelligence is inside Hezbollah. I believe that if Hezbollah would have known about and prepared for that, we have known about that more and we would have been prepared.
So they were smart enough not to inform Hezbollah, knowing that we would get the intel.
I think so, yes.
Now, this brings us kind of setting the stage for the main thrust, which is shocking because we had known about Hezbollah's plan to invade Israel. We knew, right? Based on our intelligence, I both had simulated certain exercises with the United States. You, of course, are in command centers. And at the same time, Amiad, if we knew about the possibility of a plan, even if we don't know the day, how could we have 400 soldiers? I mean, what went wrong? And on top of this, Yoav Gallant just said a short time ago that we had no shells to even shell them. We were down from 250,000 to a fraction. What happened here?
Okay, so this is like a long history lesson about what's the assumptions regarding war in Israeli grand strategy and going down to the military and how you build the military towards an expected war. So Ben-Gurion, in the beginning of the establishment of the state, he did a seminar, the war seminar, to try to articulate what is the grand plan for the state of Israel and the military and the grand strategy. And he defined it 3 pillars to articulate what is like Israel's grand scheme. So understanding the size of Israel. Israel is smaller than New Jersey, much smaller than New Jersey. So you don't have what's called depth in defense. So if you want to defend something, there's an assumption in defense, like tactics, that the enemy will always succeed to break down your line of defense. It will go through. So the question is, what do you do in the second line of defense? But to have a second line of defense, you need to have depth. That's what you call. So Israel doesn't have real depth. So the first assumption is the war needs to happen in the enemy's territory. It needs to be very quick war, very, very rapid, decisive victory. And that's 2 pillars. It's decisive and fast, because we don't have first of all, manpower. Remember, Israel in the establishment was 600,000 people. In the 6-day war, we were 2.5 million people here. The Yom Kippur War were 3 million people. That's the size, that's the amount of people we had here in Israel.
And our enemies, how big were our enemies?
Think about billion, think about hundreds of millions of people, depends how you count. We had Iraqis fighting against us. We had Moroccan army fighting against us. Egypt today is 100 million people. So tens of millions of people of a very big a population that is fighting against us.
Versus little Israel of a few 100,000 with no land to absorb an attack.
And again, there's a phrase that everyone needs to remember, that's important. Generals talk about tactics. Smart generals or good generals talk about logistics. We did not have a logistical back, an industrial back to fight long wars, because long wars, you need to have industry. Like the Second World War, America produced a ship in 4 days and 9 hours. That's an industry that can support long the heavy casualties and a lot of loss of equipment of a war. Israel doesn't have even the place to have these in that industry. So Ben-Gurion decided quick wars with a decisive victory in enemy territory. And that's the offensive. But the grand strategy was we will have a notice. That means we need to have very, very strong intelligence capabilities. We want to deter our enemies from even trying to attack us. So it needs to be very clear the size of our army. Yes. And the third thing, again, we need to, if we engage in war, we need to have a very decisive victory against them. So these are the pillars of the grand strategy. In the 90s, a committee in the beginning of 2000, they tried to convince that we need to add defense in our grand strategy. So that's why the Iron Dome is part of it. I would argue that strategically the Iron Dome is not an advantage. It's actually a liability, but we'll put that aside. That was the plan. If you look at the 56 war, we invaded the Sinai Peninsula in 3 days. Moshe Dayan was the chief of staff. In 3 days, he took over the entire Sinai Peninsula against the Egyptian army. A country 8 years old took out, like with the two empires, France and Britain, against the American ones. Great story, but militarily on the offensive, we did a great job. 6-day war. We planned, again, a country 19 years old, took over 5 different countries, destroying the Iraqi, the Syrian, the Jordanian, the Egyptian, like all the airports, destroyed the armies.
Preempting the Egyptian Air Force. And it's important to say that war, it was a preemptive attack, but one that we didn't want to
It wasn't really a preemptive attack because they were ready. They waited for us to attack. We waited for them to attack. But we had a time of 3 weeks, which we waited to see what they're doing. We did not want to have a preemptive attack, but we were ready. But the goal, the strategic goal, was to have a very, very rapid, clear territory, very clear victory on our enemies that was obviously implemented in taking their territory. We knew that. We did that in Sinai, we did it in Judea and Samaria, we did that in the Golan Heights.
And it's important to say that the Israel, I think, doubled or tripled its size in those 6 days.
Tripled, yes, so even more than tripled the size. Yes. Now,
why? Just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but why was it important to take territory? This is something, today that sounds out of fashion, and there's a huge debate in Gaza about taking territory. Why was it important to take territory?
This is like the tipping point between the 6-day war and the Yom Kippur War. Taking territory means that you're trying to find a decisive point where you destroy your enemy. What is the center of gravity of your enemy that you want to attack and destroy? So the enemy has a clear understanding of the loss, of what he loses. So in a country, taking over the country, that's destroying the enemy, destroying its army. Like there are different wars, obviously, but this is a book we're now publishing in Hebrew. Part of what we do in Herut is we publish very important books to explain, articulate ideas that will offer the discourse. So this is Adam Baim's book. I hope I pronounced the name right. It's called The Accidental President. We translated it to Hebrew to Dropping a Bomb. It talks about the 4 first months of President Harry Truman's presidency when he became accidentally a president. And
it's important to get back on. This is 1945, towards the end of World War II. FDR dies,
yes,
and Truman, who was a vice president nobody really counted on and kind of slipped in there almost accidentally, all of a sudden finds himself president.
Totally accidentally, he became president, and he understood these assumptions regarding war, and he decided that we will need to destroy Japan, that we'll have a clear victory against Japan. There will be no more imperialistic Japan. So it's either an invasion of millions of soldiers with million casualties on Japan's soil, or using the opportunity that he has with the nuclear weapons to drop them and then force them to surrender, which he chose the latter. And it proved himself that Japan today is not an imperialistic regime. He followed, obviously, on FDR's decision to go against Germany, that you have to have a decisive victory, taking over all territory. So territory is 2 things. One, it's the physical territory, but also the control on the population. So you can have either one of them, but at the end, every country you're in war in, if you want to have a clear victory against a country, they have to lose something imminent for their existence. So destroying only military assets is not enough. They need to lose control of the territory that they control.
So there's a psychological element to what you're saying, correct?
Yes.
This is how you break the back of the will of an enemy?
Yes.
Can it be done without this?
So theoretically, you can argue that they are, but practically, if you're in a battle of wills, like some kind of negotiation. A war is we have a battle between two wills, two nations who want something, and it manifests into a physical battle, but will come back to the table, negotiation table at the end, after I prove that you are exhausted, that you're done. Like, history is full of these examples, from the Peloponnesian War to the Punic War to many other wars in history that you can talk about, when nations got into battle. Now, what we did in 67 was a classical way of war. The Jordanians lost Judea and Samaria, the Egyptians lost the Sinai Peninsula, and the Syrians lost the Golan Heights. Now, the question is, what do you do with them? But the first thing you do is you take an asset that is strategically important to your enemy, so you can negotiate on that. Now, Moshe Dayan came, let's negotiate with the Palestinians and Jordanians and have a peace. Give it back to the Jordanians and have peace. We did, actually, with the Egyptians in 77, we negotiated and gave them back the peninsula to have some kind of peace. Was the price right? It doesn't matter. But at the end, that's the concept.
And it's been 48 years or so that it's held.
So it looks like it worked. Definitely with the Egyptians, with the Syrians, it was much better. We just showed them that we will never surrender. We negotiated sometimes, but we will take territory, and if needed, we will take more. So they never tried to retake the Golan Heights, because we had a very strategic location that's very hard to invade. What they tried in 73 and totally failed. So this, like, summarizing everything, you have to have a clear, very quick, very decisive victory, military victory on your enemy, to go back to the negotiation table with demands. What we started after 67, we started to see that maintaining and holding these territories is complicated. So the Golan Heights, everyone knows 120,000 Syrians were kicked out of the Golan Heights, and we announced that this is Israeli territory from now on, and that's it. Sinai Peninsula, we started putting settlements and arguing that it's ours. We built military bases there, and we started to drill oil out of it. But at the end, the negotiation came from the 73 war. That it's a very interesting example of how you come back to the negotiation table, because the Badr plan, the big plan of the Egyptians in the 73 war, in the Yom Kippur War, to take out over the Sinai Peninsula, they were not trying to destroy Israel. They tried to come back to the negotiation table after rebalancing the balance of power. So 67, they were over us. We won the war. We were over them. Then came the 73 war. Nasser said, okay, what will we do against Israel?
Nasser being
the president of Egypt, saying, I have an idea. Let's have one success in the war. Their goal was to take only a perimeter of 10 kilometers in the Sinai Peninsula, to come back as equals at the negotiation table, so we can deal a better deal for peace. It worked for them. The fact that Kissinger prevented us from destroying the Third Army of the Egyptians, the end of the war, we crossed the Suez Canal, and we locked down the Third Army of the Egyptians.
We encircled. It's very important to explain that Israel had encircled the entire Egyptian army and could have
Third Army. They have two.
Third Army.
Yes.
And we could have eliminated their main power force.
And the Americans forced us to bring them water and food and supplies to prevent them from being destroyed. So Israel does not have a decisive victory on Egypt. That put us, instead of being with our upper hand, we came back to be even at the end of the war, which brought us to a very poor deal in 77 and 78. The American goal was not to start a third world war with the Russians. Long conversation if it was right or wrong, but that's Kissinger's perspective. But we learned a lesson.
I'll just interject that on that note, one of the theories was that it enables Egypt to save face, to reclaim some of their honor. And having been to Cairo, there's a museum in Cairo dedicated to the Egyptian victory in 1973.
They totally think like that. And by the way, they're not so wrong, because if you think about a war as a part of a diplomatic negotiation, long-going diplomatic negotiation, they brought themselves back to the negotiation table as victorious out of the war, and we gave everything back. We even took Gaza back to ourselves. We kept Gaza for ourselves and not giving them back to them, and that's why we're paying the price today. Just understand the complication of it. But the price, and this is important to understand where we got today, is keeping Judea and Samaria as an asset is complicated. We have 2 million Palestinians now in Judea and Samaria. It's an asset we want to negotiate, but who we negotiate with. Now, it's very complicated for people who just want to sit quiet in their state and like under their olive trees and be calm with their Jewish state, to own territory and start these negotiations and battles. They just want to have a peace and quiet. What happened after 67, mostly in Judea and Samaria, is understanding the price of gaining territory and gaining an hostile population you don't want to manage. It shifted in the 82 war. In 82, so starting the 70s, Fatah, Yasser Arafat, started attacking Israel at the beginning from Jordan and then from Lebanon, and they started attacking us. With
Yasser Arafat, the founder of the Palestine Liberation Organization,
yes,
and who had committed and killed numerous Israelis, including children, in northern Israel. Just to put this in perspective.
Yes,
many people will Google him and see that he won the Nobel Peace Prize and think that, he was Gandhi.
Crazy murderer.
Yeah.
And he took over Lebanon in some ways, and that's like the Sunni jihadist, and he decided to attack Israel from the north. So he threw rockets on Kiryat Shmona and Nahariya and terror attacks and killing kids and children, like everything. Because his goal was to destroy the state of Israel. Now, in 76, we invaded to the Litani River and withdrew back. Again, the goal was not to take over territory, just to destroy the enemy. So destroying Fatah was a goal. But
in Lebanon,
yes. So we came back in 82, and remember, we decided we do not want to take over territory. So we shifted the strategy of the war. Instead of taking territory and negotiating it, is only coming in, destroying the enemy's facilities and withdrawing. That's the fundamental flaw in Israeli new strategy since after 67. Because we decided we did not want to take over more territory after the lessons from Judea and Samaria in 67, which we don't want that amount of population. So, by the way, the third option is to kick out the population. But in the, let's say, postmodern perspective of war, it's illegal, immoral. We can question that. The alternative cost is very expensive.
World War II, it's important to say that 6 million Germans were moved out of Sudetenland at the end of World War II, punitively. And there were tens of millions of people who were shifted as a result of World War II.
The entire Europe changed the maps and borders around Second World War. But again, the diplomatic world and arena was different in the 70s and in the 80s. And the IDF leadership was a little bit exhausted of managing and maintaining this territory. Now, it was something in the middle, because either you define that as land of Israel, it's ours, and that's it. Or it's not. And then you come into an internal debate regarding the identity of Israel. Do we want it? And it's a very, very long conversation that is not for here. But the core argument is the IDF and the, let's say, leadership of Israel did not want to take more Palestinians inside the state of Israel. So we don't want to be in that situation. So we prefer changing our military strategy only to invasion and withdrawing to raids, instead of occupying territory and taking over more, let's say, enemy territory to negotiate that. Because
so this, if we go back to Ben-Gurion's 3 principles, you said it was an attack on enemy soil, rapid and decisive.
Yes.
So is this the turning point then from a decisive victory into non-decisive victories?
So it evolves. It's evolutionary, obviously. So the War of 82, and that's like the clear example for this.
Give some background, by the way, just to that war, just for our viewers.
So Fatah took over entire Lebanon. Lebanon came into a civil war with Fatah, the Sunni extremists were part of it. They had the Maronites with the Christians. You have the Shiites, like a big mess inside Lebanon. And in between, the Sunnis, most of them are attacking Israel from Lebanon. The IDF, run by the way, a conservative general called Arik Sharon, who was the guy responsible for circling the Third Army in the 73 war, was then the defense minister. And he came to Menachem Begin, the prime minister, and saying, we need to clear out the entire area till the Litani River, and maybe even to Beirut.
Of southern Lebanon.
Southern Lebanon. After 2 weeks, he already got to Beirut, trying to kick out Fatah from Lebanon. So let's say it was like a cancer treatment to save Lebanon, put the Maronites as running the country because it was a stable country. Think about it, 56, 67, 48, we barely had war with Lebanon until the Fatah took over it. Kicked them out as a cancer tumor, kicked them out, which we succeeded to do to Tunisia. We kicked them out to Tunisia. But what happened is, what do we do now? It's a failed state. And then the Shiites started to turn against us. So instead of taking over the country or taking over some part of the country, we invented a new a phrase. It's called a security belt. So the territory is Lebanese, but we're responsible for the security. It's something in the middle. And that's the worst thing, the worst solution. Going back to Judea and Samaria, people understand that we can't control the territory anymore. We need to negotiate with someone. And we had no one to negotiate with regarding territory because the Jordanians gave up. Judea and Samaria said, this is your mess. You take care of it, because the Palestinians started to protest and have riots.
And it's important to say that the original division, the partition plan, did not grant that land to Jordan. Jordan attacks in 1948, and they illegally occupied Judea and Samaria.
Right.
Meaning many people think that the area was occupied by Israel was illegally occupied by Jordan.
Right. And remember, there was no Palestinian story till 1992 with the Oslo Accords. So the story is important to understand why we came to the Oslo Accords, because we needed to negotiate with someone. There was no one there. We wanted to kick out the territory because we did not want to have this challenge of 1 million, 2 million, depends on when and how you count population in Judea and Samaria. So they came with a solution. The enemy that we kicked in 82 from Lebanon, from Beirut, because he destroyed Lebanon and he destroyed the stable state of Lebanon.
And attacked Israel.
Killing
children.
We imported him to Judea and Samaria to take control of Judea and Samaria eventually and the Gaza Strip. That's the Oslo Accords. Think about it. Yahya Sinwar today invaded Israel, attacked Israel. We didn't succeed totally in the war against them, so we only kicked him out and not kill him as we did to Yahya Sinwar, but just for the example. And imagine we import him now to take over Judea and Samaria because we don't want to run it. That's how crazy the Oslo Accords are. Historically, we forget how crazy it was. But the argument, obviously, of the progressive and idealist left is we're going back to peace. That will solve everything. They care for one issue. And if you will have Judea and Samaria, they will control it. Now, remember, the lack of the IDF's ability to say we were willing to pay the price to occupy territory. The lack of the government want to say, this is our territory. We'll negotiate it someday if we have someone, but in the meantime, let's manage it. Just understand on a civic perspective, Judea and Samaria doesn't have a strategic planning. We're still planning as Israel, if you think about infrastructure, gas, industry, water, electricity, whatever, there's no strategic plan for Judea and Samaria because it's not ours.
We never annexed it, meaning it's officially, as somebody who lives there, right? I officially don't live in the state of Israel.
Exactly.
I live in a military
limbo.
Right.
Now
for 60 years.
For 60 years now. Now it's crazy. That's because we don't want to own it. So we're terrified about owning other territory. So now, going back to our days, we did the Oslo Accords trying to give back that to someone. It didn't work strategically because the second you come to the enemy and say, take more territory, and he's your enemy, he will take territory and you use that against you. So that's what happened to Gaza. And that's what's happening in Lebanon.
So this is the opposite. Again, going back to Israel's military doctrine, the art of war. So Israel's art of war was established by Ben-Gurion when he took this retreat, and that was what led Israel in 1948, 1956, and 1967.
And 73.
And even 73,
yeah.
We recovered, and that was our goal, and we reestablished and took more territory. So it's premised on the idea of holding land. 1982, 83, 84, we're in Lebanon, continues all the way up to 2000, and we don't want to hold that land. And so therefore, Ben-Gurion's pillars of strategy begin to erode.
Yes. Now, go back to the grand strategy pillars.
And who replaces it, by the way? Who is the architect that replaces Ben-Gurion's architect and where, help us understand the path.
Many people. One of the leading one is Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, the guy who was prime minister and chief of staff in the 90s, he withdrew from Lebanon. He was pushing that. Shimon Peres, Yossi Beilin, like the leadership of the extreme left with the lack of conservative ideas. Let's say the right wing did not really offer something strategic to the state of Israel, to the policies. Remember, there was no real right in Israel. Maybe that's some political leadership for like Yitzhak Shamir and Begin, but there was no real military right-wing people. Raful was a little bit, but there was no real thought. The universities are like socialist or progressive in Israel. The state of Israel was established as a Soviet country. We're a post-Soviet country, so the entire institutions and, let's say, theoretical world in Israel is definitely to the left. So there's no real one person who led it. It's a generation that evolved inside to that. And they were the only game in town. The right was mostly opposing their ideas, but it was not really offering a real alternative. What happened, the best example for the failure of having a real clear strategy for warfare is the Second Lebanese War. I was there 2006. Hezbollah attacked Israel and kidnapped 3 soldiers, and we started an airstrike that evolved slowly to a ground invasion that didn't have real goals. It was like some raids, and I came back and forth inside Lebanon like 4 times for no real reason. We occupied something, we came back and forth. It was crazy, and there was no real outcome on that war.
Did you know when you were fighting in Lebanon, did you know what your goal was?
No, the name of the plan was Shinui Kivun, like changing direction.
Yeah, which means like, nothing.
No, a second, but it was changing direction 13 or 14. It was like the 14th plan of changing the direction of the war. Now, we need to go back to why it started with an airstrike. So from the beginning of the 90s, the question is, how do you win a war without using the ground forces as taking over territory? So you need to find solutions. Put that together with let's say the silicon revolution, which enabled chip wars coming inside the world with having guided missiles and accurate pinpoint bombs from airplanes. So you can tell yourself a story that we destroyed enemy territories, but it doesn't really matter. Look at that. What's happening now in Yemen. Now it's a good example. Trump is trying to destroy the Houthi leadership with airstrikes. It doesn't work. It will never work. You can hurt them a little bit. You can destroy some of their infrastructure. But if you don't have a normal government running the territory, they will continue to rebuild themselves.
Because I think it's important to explain this, Amiad, because people often say, why don't you just go and bomb from the air? It's important, I think, that you flesh out a little bit for the audience as well, why that doesn't work, where the fighters go and how they're protected.
Remember, it's a game of will. What do they want? What do the Houthis want? Or what do the Palestinians and Hamasnikim and jihadists want? What do the Iranians, let's say the Iranian regime, what do they want? They want to destroy Israel. They want the battle in front of the West. You need to understand Islam. What do they want? And if the jihadists in Yemen want to destroy the West, so the fact that you destroyed 3 houses doesn't mean anything to them. They will rebuild it. So they have patience. They're beyond time. They think in a different way. They have the next world, which secular people, and we make, despite the fact that we're religious, most of our realistic decisions made out of a realistic Western secular perspective, and not a religious one. We don't think about eternity and our kids will fight the war. It's okay. We will win it. The Messiah, the jihadist Messiah will come. We think in a different way, and we're trying to solve the problem now and make the economy flourish.
So how can one ever then defeat that type of ideology? Do boots on the ground defeat that ideology? Is that possible?
No alternative to boots on the ground. There's no alternative to a real regime change. Now, is it easy? No. Is it possible? No. Do I think that the Bush invasion to Iraq did a good thing? No, it was a disaster because they thought they can impose a democracy on Iraq. No. But you need to deter them. You need to destroy as much as possible, and being very clear that you will continue to destroy and deter them every time they try to build something, you destroy it. But that endless war needs to be very clear to the Western world that that's the plan. So it's not a sovereign, normal country that you're going to have there. I prefer a sovereign state than a terror like what's happening in Iraq. That's chaos and terror. And I prefer a normal Iranian regime than a jihadist regime. But it's not me to choose most of the time. I need to understand that that's what I have. And I need to be very clear of my willingness to deter them and to fight against them. The problem is when it's on your border. So it's either we have a jihadist regime in Gaza, we have a Hezbollah, Shiite, crazy country up in the north, or we destroy them, or we create a real geographical barrier that will give us depth. Remember the defense depth. If it will give us more time for the advance and notice about the attack, and we will need to continue attacking and preventing them from building a military power that will be able to attack us. So the IDF gave up all of the above because we did not want to attack them on a daily basis. We did not want to engage in war. We don't want to take over territory. We did not want to have a real clear border. We're willing just to destroy some elements. We were going to send the Air Force and have a very good intelligence that will try to give us notice. But all of these things are strategically flawed. Because at the end, you need to have a strong army that is able to destroy and take over clear territory that will deter the enemy to restart a war, which it wants to start.
Amiad, in 2006, Israel did not have a glorious victory. And we had a lot of lessons that we took away from that, which sound like what you're saying now. It was the opposite of what Ben-Gurion said. And we suffered not a loss, but certainly not a victory. What happened between the end of the Second Lebanon War and October 7, 2023? Why did Israel not go back to the original Ben-Gurion battle plan?
It's because of the people who were leading the IDF then, and in many ways are still leading the main school of war in Israel. It's Benny Gantz, it's Gadi Eisenkot, it's Aviv Kochavi, it's Herzi Halevi, and the generals surrounding them. These are the people who were leading the IDF since the war, the Second Lebanese War, and they did everything in their power to continue the false conception about the way of war. They were unable to change and shift into a different strategy, to come back to the original pillars of Ben-Gurion of how to win a war. It's related to their moral perspective about the state of Israel, the identity of the state of Israel, the moral justification to usage of power. It's a very philosophical conversation why they did not do, but at the end, instead of expanding infantry, instead of expanding the military to a way that will have a decisive victory, understanding the limitations of airstrikes, understanding all of the above, they did the opposite because of their impasse in the inability to understand that there's a price for living in a Jewish state in the middle of the Middle East, that we will have to use military power to destroy enemies and occupy territory to have a clear border.
And if you don't?
And if you don't, you will pay a price and have the third war.
Which is what happened on October 7th.
So there's a very important book that was published lately by Guy Chazut, a brigadier general who was part of the school of the wrong school that shifted towards. He explains it's called the high-tech, the high-tech army and the infantry army, two armies that we have in the IDF today. So in 12 started to evolve. It's called the Mabam, the Ma'aracha Ben HaMilchamot. It's like the battle between wars. So it actually built its new army in the IDF that it's special ops, a special op army that is crazy with money. It's tons of money, not most, but a big chunk of the IDF budget was invested there to have crazy special ops inside Syria, Lebanon. We have intelligence. We are listening and tapping every digital thing that we have. We invested tons of money in A200, which built the high-tech sector today.
The beepers were part of this?
The beepers are part of it. Everything is very sophisticated high-tech. But there's a price for that. The price for that is the regular decisive victory infantry. And we need to understand there's limitation for the fireworks of special ops. The real problem is that we implemented the same strategy of special ops inside the regular army. Regular army is very different than special ops. And I'll give you one strategic example. Risk management. When you plan a special operation, you calculate the risk of the operation. You want to penetrate enemy territory without them knowing most of the time, with a very high probability of success and low probability of failure. And if you don't do it today, you'll do it tomorrow. A war, full-scale war, is exactly the opposite. You want to win a war that you're forced to fight it now you need 10% of probability. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the equipment that I have. In special op, I will wait for the right exact equipment to have. I go with whatever I have. That's infantry. It's a different state of mind. And they forced the way of thinking of special ops because that's the generals. Herzi Halevi special ops, Aviv Kochavi less so, but the head, Gordon, the head of the Northern Command is special ops. They all take the way of thinking of special ops and implementing it on regular army. So if you come to Netanyahu and say, okay, I want to win the war inside Hezbollah, what will we do? He said, listen, the chances of winning is only 80%. It's high risk. Let's not do it. Let's wait. Let's negotiate. What is going to happen afterwards? How we prevent from taking responsibility for the Shiite population there. It's a much different conversation than a real infantry conversation needs to happen. Think about, again, going back to the American army against Germany. Go full throttle, destroy everything on your path, get to Berlin, kill the king, and take over everything, and then let's negotiate with what's left over with Hezbollah, or Germany, then Hezbollah. Now, the same thing happened in Gaza. Just a second. The strategic mistake the IDF did in Gaza is they had three levels of the war. The first stage is taking over some of the perimeter, and then destroying some of the locations inside Gaza, and then raids. So since January 2024, the IDF leadership defined we're now raiding. So we went inside Bet Hanun, we're out. Inside, so Rafiah was part of the perimeter. Inside Netzirat, out of Netzirat. Inside Jabalia, outside Jabalia. Back and forth. And our soldiers went back and forth to the same places with now the goals terrain is the same thing. So
having taken casualties.
Had taken casualties again and again. We're forced not to win instead of owning the territory and kicking out the population, or owning the population. The third thing that happened in Gaza, and this is important because we gave Hamas the ability to manage the supplies to the Gazans because the IDF was unwilling to take responsibility for the local population, going back to the 67. These are the pillars of succeeding the war in Gaza. These are two pillars where the IDF failed to agree. They went against it. They disagreed with Netanyahu that demanded these two pillars. They said never going to happen. Now we have
the two pillars being taking land and holding
territory, holding it, and managing civil population if needed.
And what about a decisive victory? Is that part of holding?
We're past that guy. Like we passed the decisive victory. Now we want to get there. We want the picture of Hamas being surrendering. But I don't see that happening now. It could have happened December 2023. But now, decisive victory, we don't have one now. Maybe in Iran.
Well, let me ask you, Amiad. It seems now that we've re-entered into Gaza. It's been 2-3 weeks. We're back in Gaza. It looks like we're taking territory quickly. The numbers of terrorists that are dying seem to be very, very high. It feels like something's different. Do you feel like this more recent campaign in Gaza, something has changed?
Yes, definitely. Something has changed. The definition of taking territory is on the table in the orders of the IDF. That's clear. It's going to happen. It's happening. The government will need to decide what it does the next day with the territory. But when we gain territory, we're taking it to keep in the meantime.
We're holding it.
We're holding it. The second thing, we're talking today about putting more supplies. It's no more Hamas managing the supplies to the population. It's in a place where the IDF will run the supplies for civil population under our jurisdiction and governing. That changes the financial structure because Hamas made a lot of money for the aid and the supplies for the Gazans. And we're willing to negotiate and let's say, siege Gaza. We're sieging Gaza now in a thing that we didn't do for the past year and a half. Now, it worked for 4,500 years. Why should siege work today? But that's, again, going to the postmodern perspective and way of war.
But you think that Israel now... So what changed? I mean, why now? And what changed between now? We've been in and out of Gaza now 3 or 4 times. This is the being the 4th time. What happened?
The chief of staff. The entire staff of the IDF, leadership staff, changed because the generals who were running the IDF were promoted to become like the brigadier generals who were fighting inside Gaza and Lebanon were promoted now to be part of the leading staff. But most of it, Herut Center was basically fired. He quit. And Eyal Zamir, who worked with Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant and Israel Katz, he came back as running the IDF. He's less progressive. He's an armed forces guy, so he understands regular warfare.
He was
and
tanks,
special ops
wasn't
tanks.
he? Armored Corps.
Yes.
So Armored Corps, the definition of Armored Corps is holding territory.
Maneuvering like in the original part of it, it's not raiding, it's maneuvering, it's using movement and fire to support advancement towards taking over territory and high ground and things like that he do. So that's like, he's the guy who understands the origins of it, doesn't think in special ops perspective.
So here we are, the State of Israel now, we're 77 years later. And Ben-Gurion, the founder of the State of Israel, first prime minister, is he back now on the scene? Is his art of war going to be something now that's going to lead us? And if so, who would take the charge of this moving forward?
So the answer is there's an opportunity to change the art of war of Israel. The question is, do we have the right people to lead it? And what are we doing to make that happen? So the answer is there's a clear opportunity. Now the people. The IDF is in a generational shift. Herzi Halevi and Aviv Kochavi are leftovers of the previous generation. The last generation, let's say, of the left progressive leadership of the IDF, that, and going back to the philosophical conversation of how they conceive about the state of Israel. The name of the IDF is Israeli Defense Forces. There was a conversation in the beginning of the 2000s, between Shaul Mufaz, who was the chief of staff, and a professor called Avi Sagi, who was writing, let's say, the moral ethic code of the IDF. And they had a conversation. Shaul Mufaz came to him. I want to have, being victorious is one of the, the code of the IDF is pushing towards victory. And the answer of Avi Sagi, a professor, extreme left-wing professor from Hebrew U, was, it's immoral to be victorious. Our goal is to defend. So our goal is to survive. And winning is not a goal. It's immoral to win a war. Now, these people are still educating the leadership of the IDF. Avi Sagi is deep inside education. Asa Kasher. These people are extreme left-wing professors who are teaching our leadership how to think about morality and war. That generation was running the IDF till now. The young generation came from a different place. There's a generational shift in Israel. That is, the younger you are in Israel, the more conservative you are. And that generation are the soldiers in the fields. If you look about pictures and names of the soldiers killed in the past war, a big majority of them are either religious, traditional, conservative. You can see a lot of debates and conversations and how we memorize them. It's all very, very Israeli, traditional, Jewish, conservative people with a way of memorizing them. That's because the majority of the infantry and the ground troops of the IDF are coming from that world. And these are the generals coming from the same world. And their intuitions, their way of thinking is very, very, let's say, Ben-Gurion style. And they're trying to articulate arguments against the intellectual elite that is offering them it's immoral to win a war. Now it's dramatically changing with a lot of things that are happening in Israel in the past decade, with a lot of ideas being articulated to change the way of war and offering positive alternatives, not only going against, we went against Oslo in the 90s, but it's no, this is the right way to do it. It's not I'm against what you're arguing for. So there's a new generation in IDF that is changing it now. I can tell you on a personal level, and Herut as an institution, we're helping them to articulate these ideas. We're writing now a very, very long book that is drilling down to how to implement Ben-Gurion's strategic way of thinking in national security and in warfare into Israel's new national security, and how to rebuild the IDF now. There's very good people in the IDF now, in the, let's say, colonel, brigadier general, some of the generals, very good people. I'm very optimistic, but it's a lot of work. That we don't have the intellectual back of the universities to do that. We're stuck an avant-garde trying to fight against the system, but we have the IDF elite generals with us, so I'm optimistic about that.
I want to ask you, just to paint a picture for us as we kind of conclude here, what if Ben-Gurion was here? What would victory look like, and how may it play out right now in Gaza and Lebanon over the next coming months? What would that look like?
I think it's very hard to think of Ben-Gurion as running an empire, because Ben-Gurion was running a state that wanted to survive in the 40s and 50s, but he thought big. That's why the 56 war, he colluded with Britain and France against the Americans. It was a crazy, the game he played on the big tables, the big kids table. Russia, America, France, and England, and the small Israel. So he was thinking big, despite the fact that he understood that I need to survive. And the way he survived is thinking big. I think Ben-Gurion, if he was today and understanding what we are today, he would think much bigger than what Israel is today. We are limited in the imagination of our leaders. Our leaders, our political leaders, still want only to survive. And it's a problem. Now, I'm not against survival, but I think it doesn't suffice, our ability, the state of the nation today, and definitely not a future and the vision. Everyone's talking about Israel's birth rates. When you bring kids to the world, and I have 6 my own, you have 5 or 6, we believe in the future. We believe that there's a better future for us. And it needs to manifest in our daily decisions. So part of it is we bring a lot of kids, but we believe in the future. And if you don't bring kids, like Europe doesn't, like America and Japan and South Korea and most of the Western world doesn't believe in the future. We don't think you're part of something big. So you're very limited in your imagination about the future. The next generation of Israelis, the next generation of leaders, and Ben-Gurion was from the same place. He really imagined an empire called Israel. That's why he had the ability to go against everything in the world and establish the state of Israel, to imagine a much more successful Israel that is like a dominant empire in the Middle East, not only economically, not only militarily, but culturally and spiritually, and in many, many aspects that Israel needs to imagine next, the future of Israel. I think this is a point that we need a new Ben-Gurion to come to Israel. And Netanyahu is a very, very good prime minister in surviving. He's fighting survival. I believe we will attack Iran in the next couple of weeks or months. I think we will destroy and prevent attacks from our enemies in the next couple of months. But it doesn't offer a real positive alternative for the vision for how we do. Why are we here? The philosophical question of the more justification for our Jewish state. And I think that's the call for the next generation of leaders in Israel.
So the next generation has to look beyond survival and look at something even greater, something more like the next stage in the progression of the development of the Jewish state and the state of Israel.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a big opportunities for us, especially because of the human capital we have, the culture we have, the traditions we have.
The incredible young generation here, religious, not religious, secular, Sephardi, Ashkenazi. I mean, they've answered the call. We're both considered, when we go out to fight, we see these young people, they consider us the old men. They're charging in the front lines.
Yes, there's a lot of challenges, but I'm very optimistic. It's not easy. Remember, building a country is not easy, but when we will look back in 7 years from today, back about the past 7 years, the growth and the success of Israel in these 75 years will be incomparable. Like, it will be much better, much more than we may even imagined.
Amiad, thank you very much for joining us here on the True East Podcast. This was the True East Podcast examining Ben-Gurion, the original Israeli art of war. Where has it gone? And it looks like there's hope that hopefully it's back again with the new generation to bring Israel not only to a place of survival, but according to Amiad, to bring us to beyond survival, to a place of Israel in the next generation. Thank you for joining.